You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 24th of June 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Ukrainians want to come home to this European way of life. And indeed today, you see, we are one family, we are one vision, and family members help each other.
EU accession talks begin with Ukraine and Moldova, but will they lead to full membership of the bloc? Venezuela goes to the polls at the end of next month. We'll ask if there'll be enough impartial scrutiny to ensure a fair election. As conflict intensifies around Israel's northern border with Lebanon, can Hezbollah breach the Iron Dome? Then...
We are interested in cities because we feel like they are the engines of human progress and at the forefront of changes in culture and in politics.
We begin the countdown to reveal the city that took the coveted #1 spot in our annual Quality of Life survey. We'll flick through the front pages, hear about a Paris-based football team that could soon have new ownership, and finally, we'll have a fashion roundup from Paris. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Gunmen opened fire at a synagogue, an Orthodox church and a police post in attacks across two cities in Russia's North Caucasus region of Dagestan on Sunday, killing an Orthodox priest and multiple police officers. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday that the phase of intense fighting against Hamas in the Gaza Strip is coming to an end, but that the war will not end until the Islamist group no longer controls the Palestinian enclave. And more than 1,000 people died during Hajj this year, according to a Reuters tally, as extreme heat hammered the nearly 2 million who took part in the annual Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Belgium currently holds the presidency of the European Union and has announced that talks will begin tomorrow on formal accession of Moldova and Ukraine. The timing is crucial as Hungary takes over the revolving presidency on July the 1st, which may have led to further stalling. Well, I'm joined now by the Moldovan-Romanian journalist Paula Erezanu from Chisinau. Paula, many thanks for coming on the show. What is the process of joining the EU?
Oh, it's a very long process, but fortunately, unlike in the Balkans, Moldova and Ukraine have received the green light at the various milestones much quicker for political reasons, and the EU has learned to move faster than in the past. It has learned that the security of Eastern Europe, of the region, is also Europe's security. So we will see how, when exactly Ukraine and Moldova can become full members of the European Union. At the moment, the Moldovan government is speaking about 2030 kind of date when Moldova could join the EU. I mean, as a full member.
That's quite some way off, though, isn't it? I mean, in terms of the security situation in Europe, how much protection is that actually giving Moldova right now?
Well, it's a complicated question. France and Moldova have signed a security agreement. There is more and more cooperation in terms of cybersecurity, and also in terms of fortifying the military in Moldova. But of course, at the moment, Moldova really depends on the Ukrainian army from a security point of view, and on how far the front line is from it. So if the front line moves back to Odessa, as it was at the beginning of the war in 2022, then yes, we will be more at risk. But at the moment, we are mainly defended by the Ukrainian army, which of course gets support from the EU and from the US.
What does Moldova allege that Russia has done to derail its EU bid?
So our government officials have kept saying that after Ukraine, Moldova is the second most affected country by this war, both economically and from a kind of political security point of view. I think recent calculations made by our security forces said that Russia invests millions of euros every month into kind of actors such as Shore in order to destabilize things at home. There are all sorts of fake news popping up everywhere every day. I can give you one example. At some point in the center of Chisinau, there were thousands of posters that said that the French Foreign Legion is asking Moldovan soldiers to join it to fight in Ukraine. It was a poster that gave no contact details, and the grammar and the kind of orthography was a bit off. It was clearly a fake. But it was used on social media in order to spark panic and to create these associations that joining the EU means war, that voting for pro-European parties means war, and so on.
And how is that viewed within Moldova? Are people believing this kind of propaganda? How do they feel, the citizens, about joining the EU?
The majority of Moldovans support EU integration, and we will have a referendum in October on the same day as presidential elections, when the incumbent Maia Sandu will try to secure a second term. And other kind of candidates will try to fight against her, but at the moment she's the main kind of candidate with the biggest chances of continuing to stay in the presidential seat in the next 4 years. But unfortunately, yes, we are more vulnerable globally to propaganda, because a lot of us consume our media on TikTok or on Facebook or on Instagram, and our attention spans are a lot shorter. And also what's happening in Moldova is that we also have this Soviet heritage. A lot of the population speaks Russian as well, as some as a first language, a minority as a first language, the majority as a second language. And so Russian propaganda can hit us directly through Russian language. Also some people feel some sort of cultural affinity, and so they are likely to kind of believe information that comes in Russian. So the opinions are divided. The majority of Moldovans do want to join the EU, but what Russia is really good at doing is using vulnerabilities, existent vulnerabilities, and mixing fakes with half fakes and challenging perception everywhere, not just in Moldova, but as we've seen in the UK or in France or in America.
How robust is the independent press then in Moldova? Do Moldovans have the opportunity to read newspapers and see broadcasts or hear broadcasts that are impartial and true?
Yes, of course. We do have a kind of solid sector of independent media. But the problem is that they are underfunded. So while Russia is channeling millions and millions of dollars, euros, pounds, whatever, into its propaganda, our advertising market is very small in Moldova, so that can't be the only source of existence for the independent media locally. So a lot of our independent media depends on European grants, which are very small. And so that makes its financial situation quite unstable. yes, there are lots of sources of news and talk shows and analysis, but this is the kind of the framework in which Moldovan independent media operates. These are the main challenges, and they are financial.
Now, the EU is holding this meeting tomorrow. The rush presumably is that once Hungary takes over, Viktor Orban and his government are much less keen on Moldova joining the EU. Are they the only country within the Union who's against full membership? How influential are they?
Yes, Hungary is against the full membership of Ukraine, not of Moldova. And they are a kind of pariah, right, in the European Union. They, of course, holding the presidency will give them additional powers. But at the moment, it's just one voice that goes against the rest of the countries. Of course, there are worries surrounding how one integrates such a big country as Ukraine with 40 million people, a country at war. And we've seen tensions about the grain exports of Ukraine, and further such issues can appear in the process of integration. But with Moldova, the question is a lot easier. We're talking about 2.6 million people or so, 1 million of which are already European citizens through Romanian citizenship. So in a way, there are already more Moldovan European citizens than European citizens in Latvia, for instance, which has a smaller population.
Paula, thank you very much indeed. That's Paula Erezanu there. And we'll have more from Ukraine's perspective on EU accession on the briefing. That's at noon London time today. This is The Globalist. It's 7:12 a.m. here in London. That's 2:12 in Caracas. Now to Venezuela, where the elections are slated for July the 28th. Last week, 8 out of the 10 opposition candidates signed an agreement to respect the result. And although that feels like a positive, there are worrying circumstances that point to the possibility that polls will be neither free nor fair. I'm joined now by Dr. Christopher Sabatini, who's a senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Chris, many thanks for coming on the show again. On the surface, this agreement looks good. Why might it not be?
There are two reasons. First of all, the candidates you mentioned are really pro-regime candidates. They're basically shills put up by the government of Nicolás Maduro, the incumbent government, to, first of all, split the vote, the opposition vote, confuse voters, but also in this case to give the vote some patina of legitimacy that it really doesn't deserve. But second of all, what's important is the two candidates that opposed it. I mean, you cannot expect to declare that you're going to support the results of the election before the election's even held, especially given the conditions it's being held under. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But by all accounts, the government's gaming this election so that it can try to win, although it has to overcome a severe deficit in terms of public opinion polls of the opposition candidate, Edmundo González, versus the incumbent president, Nicolás Maduro. But the idea that you would endorse the election results before we even have a full reckoning of how free and fair they are, or of the vote count, seems a little premature at best.
So let's talk about those conditions that the election will be held under. I mean, for instance, the role and the attitude of the Electoral Commission, or the CNE.
Yes. First of all, the CNE is packed with government supporters. It has really carried the government's wishes out in the elections, including banning individual candidates. Just last week, 10 opposition mayors were removed from office or disqualified from office for having supported the opposition candidate González. That was a decision of the CNE. The CNE also, at the recommendation of the Speaker of the National Assembly, disinvited the European Union from sending election observers for the July 28th elections. That actually was part of a agreement that was established in October last year between the opposition and the government, that it would convene elections, set a date, but also invite credible international election observers to observe the elections. And then on the whim of the president of the National Assembly, a pro-government figure, the CNE disinvited the EU because of some trumped-up concerns about ongoing economic sanctions against members of the government. So it's clearly shown its hand in this election. There's also rumors, and I think they're pretty close to being true right now, that they're going to probably rejigger the ballot a little bit. If you look at the ballot right now, for example, Nicolas Maduro's image appears several times on the ballot, again, an effort to try to confuse voters. But also there's rumors that Edmundo Gonzalez may actually be banned from one of the three parties that he's running under.
And tell us about Gonzalez alongside Maria Corina Machado. I believe he's really standing for her because she can't.
Yeah, it's, again, in that agreement that I mentioned in October last year, the government agreed to try to reevaluate whether three candidates who had been disqualified from occupying public office should be reevaluated. And unfortunately, in December, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal handed down a decision upholding this disqualification, which prevented Maria Corina Machado from winning. And just a month before, she had won a opposition primary, overwhelmingly with more than 90% of the vote. So what happened was, in the meantime, since she was disqualified, they put up this sort of stand-in candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez. He's a 70-year-old retired diplomat. He'd been active in the opposition, but not really a leading opposition figure. He's pretty much staying in his flat in Caracas and letting Maria Corina Machado do the campaigning. She's drawing huge crowds across the country, clearly has inspired the voters. And so, what will happen should Edmundo Gonzalez be elected? His is the face that will be on the ballot. But most people know when they cast their ballot, they're really casting a vote for Maria Corina Machado, who right now is leading a unified opposition and has the mandate of over 90% of opposition voters in Caracas, or in Venezuela, rather.
Now, you say the EU's been disinvited, but there will still be some observers, international observers.
Yes. First of all, the government invited a range of observers, including the African Union, the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa bloc to send some observers. Those aren't really observers in the traditional sort of professional, credible election observation mold that the United Nations, the EU, the Organization of American States, and the Carter Center send. So really the two that are going to matter here right now after the disinvitation of the European Union are the Carter Center. The Carter Center agreed last week. The government did agree to a number of its conditions, including allowing its observers to have freedom of movement in the country. But its presence there is going to be very small. It will probably only likely be in the capital city, in the CNE, the Electoral Council's headquarters, and in two major cities, really not sufficient to detect fraud, not sufficient to detect sort of on-the-ground election conditions in front of voting booths. For example, one of the things the government's done to try to game the election is now it's placed the voting centers in military barracks, in areas and buildings that are known to be pro-government. And then you also have the United Nations panel of experts that may be sent. It isn't clear yet, but that's just a panel of experts. Again, it's not a fully ramped up observation mission, and its report, whatever it would report, is actually private and goes directly to the Secretary General. So we're looking at, yes, a very necessary presence on the ground to protect people, to point out cases of fraud, even to encourage confidence in the vote, but they're simply not going to be sufficient, especially now with the EU not there.
So what will the international community do if the Maduro government flagrantly steals the election, which it looks like it's on course to do?
Yes, it does. This is speculation, but I'm going to enter into it with a little bit of caution, I guess. I think the international community is really focused on these elections. The date was a result of this agreement that I mentioned in October last year. It's seen as a way of breaking the deadlock. And it was seen as sort of the culmination, if you will, of intense diplomacy with the government of Norway actually serving as a broker, but also the scaling back of sanctions that had been applied by the EU, by UK, and by the United States that have allowed investors in, reduced some of the sanctions on individuals within the government. So this has been a big moment. What it will do is unclear. I think on the Maduro government's part, as you say, we'll see if it can completely steal this election. Edmundo Gonzalez is far ahead of Nicolás Maduro, but they're clearly trying everything they can. It's going to be pretty ham-handed how they're going to steal it. What the international community will do will probably, I think, try to re-engage in negotiations. But at this point, it's clear this government simply doesn't want to cede power and certainly doesn't want to cede it to Maria Corina Machado and a much more conservative element of the opposition than many others.
Christopher Sabatini, thank you very much indeed. Now, still to come on the programme.
And then obviously a lot of questions around present ownership. This has been a fan base that's always been a fan of the people, by the people, and for the people. And they deserve to have an ownership that respects the passion they have for the team and equally shares the passion for their team.
We hear about a storied Paris-based football team, Red Star FC, that could soon have new ownership. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. I'm Georgina Godwin. The time here in London, 7:21. And we'll continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Zing Singh, who's a journalist and the host of Good Bad Billionaire on BBC Sounds. Welcome, Zing. It's the first time you've been here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
It's lovely to have you in the studio. Now, listen, this was a great shock. We were told that nobody in the country knew when the British elections were going to take place. And there was a surprise announcement by Rishi Sunak that indeed it would be July the 4th. At least that's what we thought. But it now turns out that rather a large amount of people did know because they went and placed bets.
Yes, they did. So this is a story that is really only coming to the fore, and I think it will rumble on for several days. Don't forget, we are less than 2 weeks ahead of the general election on July the 4th. And basically up to 4, maybe some say even as many as 5 Tory candidates and their officials are now the subject of gambling commission, that's the gambling watchdog, inquiries, because they were placed bets on the date of the July the 4th election ahead of the time, so ahead of when Rishi Sunak announced it. Now, George Osborne on his political podcast, Political Currency, actually said that only 40 people within the party knew about the day of the general election, which, you know, by my maths makes it about 10% of people who placed bets. It's not looking very good.
It's really not looking good, and I'm afraid the outlook for Sunak himself is not good at all. I have no particular feeling for the man, but he does seem to be there just to draw the abuse of everybody. It's that people are letting out the frustrations of the last 14 years on this one man who really didn't have that much to do with it personally.
Yes, and he's for his part, he said he is incredibly angry about the allegations and that anyone who's been found to have broken the rules will face the full consequences of the law and that they'll also be taken out of the Conservative Party. So far, however, he hasn't actually removed anyone from the party. And so while some people have stepped away from their posts, there are still people running for Conservative candidacy.
Is it all just a bit of a joke now?
Wow, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think the decision to place a bet on the day of the general election reflects a kind of almost nihilism within the party. Maybe certain people who placed those bets thought that they could get away with it. I mean, it really speaks to the lack of party discipline within the overall Conservative Party as well.
And this whole thing of one rule for them, one rule for us, which in fact Michael Gove pointed out, who is a Conservative, saying that this was the feeling that was being transmitted by this real horror, this breach in the law.
Yes, exactly. It really does press all the buttons that were pretty much established by Partygate, that sense of, you know, they're doing what they want, we can't do what we want. I think Ian Duncan Smith actually called it venal, which is incredibly strong language from someone who once led the Conservative Party. So I think all in all, there's an enormous amount of anger, both from the public, but also from within the Conservative Party.
Let's turn to Saudi Arabia, where more than 1,300 people have died during this year's Hajj pilgrimage. Tell us more.
Yes, this is an incredibly tragic story that is only just emerging as well. So Saudi authorities have announced that over 1,300 pilgrims have died amidst incredibly high temperatures and heat in Saudi Arabia. So on some days around the holy sites, temperatures reached almost 50 degrees Celsius. And the fatalities now include over 600 Egyptians, 170 pilgrims from Indonesia, almost 100 from India, and dozens more from other countries, including Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria.
Now, as we're reporting in our headlines, some Egyptian travel companies are being very much investigated about this. This was because a lot of tourists weren't official. What's the difference then? Why were official tourists shielded from this?
So Saudi Arabia has created two different types of visas. So one is a kind of general tourist visa, and one is a special Hajj visa. In order to visit the holy sites, you have to have the latter. But what a lot of people are doing, and they're calling them unauthorized pilgrims, is they get on a tourist visa, they enter the country maybe a few weeks, maybe a month before the holy month, and then they will instead stick around and try and travel there unauthorized themselves. This means they don't have the same access to facilities, they don't have the same access to accommodation and transport, which means they're much more exposed to the weather.
Right, so there are air-conditioned zones and all the rest of it is out of their reach. I see how that works. Let's move to Singapore now. They have doubled down on lab-grown meat.
Yes, this is a really interesting story. So basically the cultured meat industry, or what is called cultivated meat, what we call lab-grown meat for simplicity's sake, is a growing industry, but it's kind of suffered from a lack of investment. Singapore has really stepped up to kind of provide a place in which innovation can take place. And one of the ways in which innovation has been taking place is that it's been selling this cultivated meat in delis. So it's actually become the first country in the world where you can buy cultivated meat from a shop as opposed to purchasing it through a restaurant.
And there's a huge amount of investment that the Singaporean authorities are actually pouring into this.
Yes, so they've actually committed $230 million towards alternative proteins. And this is part of a kind of overall plan called 30 by 30 to sustainably produce 30% of its own nutritional needs locally, which includes what they call alternative meats.
Are we looking at Silicon Valley investment here, or are they pulling out?
So there has been some Silicon Valley investment, but nowhere near the amount of investment that's gone into kind of technology such as renewable technology. So there's been $3 billion put into the cultivated meat industry worldwide over the last 10 years, but that's a fraction of what's been put into renewable energy.
Right, well, let's stick with animals. This time it's pets. Are we loving our pets to death, is the question the New York Times asks. What's the answer?
Well, some veterinary experts and some pet experts are now starting to believe that maybe we are simply spending too much money, too much time, and too much resources on our pets, and that we're actually distorting the human-animal relationship as a result of the money and care we devote to our furry friends.
So in other words, pets are not allowed to be pets. They're being treated more like humans. We're taking away their autonomy.
Exactly. So the argument goes that the more that we treat people like pets like people, the more dependent on us they become, and as a result, the more health and behavioral issues that our pets develop.
And they back this up how?
So basically, one of the reasons that some experts started to come around to this way of thinking is that there's a growing industry within the pet industry for confinement and isolation. So basically, there have been millions put into what's been called the confinement industry. You know, we're talking about harnesses, we're talking about confined spaces, about cages. And what that has led to, some people think, is an increase in animal anxiety and separation anxiety, as well as aggression. So roughly 60% of cats and dogs are now obese or overweight as a result of being confined, as a result of not being able to run free like their ancestors might have done.
And there's some horrible statistics here about how many dogs were euthanized at shelters.
Yes, so, I mean, hundreds of thousands of animals have been euthanized every year. And I think what it speaks to is our growing inability to have animals that fit into our lives, rather than understanding that these animals are kind of live creatures where we need to adapt our lifestyles towards them.
There are some countries that are taking moves, they're taking measures. Scandinavian countries have started to ban the breeding of some dog breeds.
Yes, and there are some very notorious breeds, such as French bulldogs, for instance, that are so genetically inbred that they cannot breathe properly. If you see a French bulldog on the street, one of the first things you'll notice is it wheezes a lot, and that's because it's been bred to have a particularly flat face. Countries in Scandinavia start to move towards banning those kinds of breeds because they say that they aren't fit for purpose.
Do you have a dog?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
She is a rescue, so hopefully she'll be with us for many years to come, as she's a mixed breed.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Zing Sing. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Gunmen opened fire at a synagogue, an Orthodox church and a police post in attacks across two cities in Russia's North Caucasus region of Dagestan on Sunday, killing an Orthodox priest and multiple police officers, the region's head said. The simultaneous attacks came 3 months after 145 people were killed in an attack claimed by the Islamic State on a concert hall near Moscow, Russia's worst terrorist attack in years. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday that the phase of intense fighting against Hamas in the Gaza Strip is coming to an end, but that the war will not end until the Islamist group no longer controls the Palestinian enclave. Once the intense fighting is over in Gaza, Netanyahu said, Israel will be able to deploy more forces along the northern border with Lebanon, where fighting with Iran-backed Hezbollah has escalated. And more than 1,000 people died during Hajj this year, according to a Reuters tally, as extreme heat hammered the nearly 2 million who took part in the annual Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. An Egyptian crisis unit tasked with investigating the situation said it has suspended licenses of 16 tourism companies and referred them to the public prosecutor, accusing them of being responsible for deaths, mainly among pilgrims not registered under the official system. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 9:31 in Jerusalem, 8:31 in Zurich. The UN Secretary-General says that full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah would be a catastrophe. But as the conflict on Israel's northern border with Lebanon increases, the likelihood that the Iran-backed militia group could overwhelm Israel's air defences becomes ever more likely. Well, Jean-Luc Samin is a senior research fellow at the Middle East Institute of the National University of Singapore and joins me now. Jean-Luc, many thanks for coming on the programme. I wonder if we could begin with the latest news of the fighting between Hezbollah and the IDF around the Lebanese border.
Yes, what we saw, especially in the last 2-3 weeks, is an escalation in the number of attacks on both sides. We've seen more and more frequent attacks, now on a daily basis on both sides. But in addition to that, we saw these attacks going deeper into the territory of the enemy, either on the Lebanese side or the Israeli side. So until, I would say, early June, everyone or a lot of the experts were confident that regional escalation or escalation with Hezbollah was prevented, was contained. But in the last months, clearly this confidence has been shattered.
US officials have voiced concern that Hezbollah may be able to overwhelm Israel's much-vaunted Iron Dome. And I wondered if you could briefly tell us how the Iron Dome works.
Yes, so Iron Dome is created to intercept rockets. So basically you have a missile which is fired by the Israelis to intercept another missile. The type of missile we're talking about is short range. It's rockets. So these are mostly short range rockets which are fired from Hamas and some from Hezbollah. So what it means is that these are unsophisticated weapons. For instance, in April, when Iran fired 300 missiles and drones to Israel, Iron Dome was not really involved. These were other missile defense systems. So the reason why you have this concern from the U.S. is both in terms of quantity and quality. Hezbollah would be challenging the Israeli defense. In terms of quantity, it has hundreds of thousands of rockets, so it could technically overwhelm Iron Dome by sending thousands and thousands of them. And in terms of quality, because as I said, it's Iron Dome is designed to intercept unsophisticated systems. So the accuracy and the range of the missiles that Hezbollah operates will go far beyond what Iron Dome can do.
So, in fact, it could collapse. What would happen then?
Well, first, this is not a surprise for the U.S. or the Israeli military planners. You have to keep in mind that before October 7, the biggest threat for the military planners in Israel was not Hamas, but Hezbollah. So they have I think, a good understanding of that challenge. And that is the reason why they do not rely simply on Iron Dome, and the reason why until now we didn't see a full-scale war. I think the Israelis understand that if there was a war, they would not be able to contain the threats of missiles from Hezbollah unless they go on the offensive, meaning intense air campaign that would target what we call the launchers, the sites inside Lebanon where the missiles and the rockets are located. This is a very difficult task because it involves a lot of intelligence, a lot of coordination with the Air Force. Plus, obviously, we're talking about urban areas, so you can be sure that this would lead to collateral damages. And so probably a humanitarian crisis as well in Lebanon. So all of that has to be factored. But again, I don't think this is a surprise. This is well known for years.
Jean-Luc, thank you very much indeed. That's Jean-Luc Samin there. And you're with Monocle Radio. This week sees Monocle's brand new July-August double issue hit newsstands, and in it you'll find our annual Quality of Life survey. Our editors have been busy crunching the data to compile this year's ranking of the world's top 20 most livable cities. And all this week on The Globalist, we'll be counting down to reveal the city that took the coveted number one spot. Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, Carlotta Rebello, sat down with Monocle's editor, Josh Fennett, and foreign editor, Alexis Self, to find out more about the survey. She started by asking Alexis to explain this year's metrics.
So in its purest form, this is a ranking of the world's 20 most livable cities, according to Monocle magazine. It's something that we have done since our first July-August issue. So it's always in the July-August double issue, our biggest issue of the year. And I suppose it arises from an understanding that most people who read Monocle live in cities, are interested in cities as these kind of engines of human progress and culture. And so we thought it would be an interesting exercise to look at the data and compare a wide variety of data from health, crime, police, government statistics, and also cultural markers, stuff that, again, our readers are interested in. And we crunch those numbers every year. Then we have a conversation among our editorial team looking at which cities have done well over the past 12 months. And through those conversations and those numbers, we come up with a list of the 20 most livable cities in the world.
Well, Josh, I quite like this idea of, kind of combining a bit of science in the metrics with art and the softer spots as well, this idea of soft power and what distinguishes these cities among themselves. What have been your main takeaways of this year's survey?
Cities are fun. One of the reasons that people get drawn to live in cities is obviously economic opportunity. It's a nice place to live, but sometimes also it's the idea of that place. And sometimes then when you get an idea of a place and then you arrive, it's very different. So cities aren't quantitative experiences. They can be quantified, but ultimately where you live, how you live, the way you want to live is qualitative, and we think this needs to be reflected in the rankings. So other big serious titles also, calculate GDP per capita and, will tell you that Singapore is the best place to live on earth. And having spent a lot of time in Singapore, I can tell you it is a great place to spend some time. Is it the most livable city on earth? Well, Monocle's got some challenges to that. Is it a place where you can do whatever you want? Can you make things in the city? Can you have a glass of wine after a certain time in the evening? Does the government trust you to do what you want to do? So I think the debates that we have in the office are always fascinating because we've all got runners and riders in this race. We all want to see certain cities do well. We all have relationships with cities that are a little bit emotional, and that's the reason that we crunch the numbers, we look at ambulance response times, we look at how quickly or likely your city is to clean up that graffiti that's ruined your neighbourhood or, depending on what kind of person you are, made your neighbourhood better. Ultimately, cities and experiencing cities are a qualitative experience, and that's what we want to show you in the ranking. We want to show you people diving headlong into a harbour that's been cleaned up and show you, a fabulous new series of fountains that's making a city in a warming climate a more agreeable place to live. And we also need to underpin that with some quantitative understanding of social inequality, of what it's like to live there and what it's like to work there.
Well, let's focus on some of these metrics, if we may, because I remember, the ones that always features in the rankings, and understandably so, is, for example, the number of international departures and arrivals. But over the years, we've seen that change to reflecting exactly the modernity and the rapid urbanization that cities are faced with, from the number of electric charging points, for example. What are some then of these metrics used to come up with the positions for the top 20? What was the thinking behind it?
It is quantitative. That's the basis for the ranking, is based on this hard data. But at the same time, if you were going to move somewhere or go on holiday somewhere even, you wouldn't maybe ask your bank manager or, your doctor where the best place to go to, keep your money safe or for your, heart health would be. You would talk to someone whose views and interests aligned with your own. And we are interested in cities because we feel like they are the engines of human progress and at the forefront of changes in culture and in politics. And, if you look back at surveys from different years, they reflect the kind of zeitgeist and the conversations about city living. So, a couple of years ago, we were still in the post-pandemic stage. And I think, cities perhaps suffered more or at least saw more extreme changes due to the pandemic. And therefore, we kind of reassessed and reappraised, and kind of went back to basics a bit with what a good city is and what it provides. We looked again at security, stuff like police and ambulance response times, trust in police, violent crime per capita, etc. Thankfully, we're moving on a bit from that immediate post-pandemic shock. And this year, particularly, we looked at quality of life as it compares to health, actually, and longevity. And, lots of cities that we're interested in at the moment and we think are doing particularly well also have citizens who live longer, healthier and happier lives, because I think people are talking a lot about how mental health affects your longevity and it's intrinsic to that. If you are happy, it's often because of your environment. So this year, particularly, we looked at average life expectancy and used that as a kind of extra weighting when deciding the ranking.
Well, we'll be revealing the top 3 cities over the next coming days here on the Globalist. But perhaps, Josh, give us just a little snapshot of what people can expect in this survey.
Well, thrills, spills, average life expectancy, the usual mix of eclectic things. As Lex said, these things reflect the moment and they're meant to be a provocation. They're meant to have people in city halls and architects and developers and designers talking about these issues that are important. So a couple of years ago, maybe the average number of hours of sunshine a year would have been super important because we thought everyone was going to end up working from home and leaving cities. So you want to live somewhere sunny. To be honest, the thing that's hoving into view is that cities are very, very warm this year. We speak during a heat wave that will doubtlessly take lots of lives. So, the way that we talk about hours of sunshine needs to be modulated with what's going on and how we keep cities cool as well. One thing that's interesting this year we've picked up on as well is rubbish, total rubbish. The amount of rubbish that's on our streets and doesn't get picked up, the way that graffiti gets managed. So I guess cities are big and cities are small. They're the infrastructure that lights up a park in Madrid. They're also the walkways in France. They're the banning of the trottinettes in Paris. They are Singapore's attitude to its citizens. And I think what people will get, whether they live in San Francisco or whether they live in Sydney, is a good dose of benchmarks about people doing things well and hopefully some things that get people hot under the collar and willing to argue about what makes their city great and why perhaps their city even missed out this year, which doubtlessly will rile some people who we'd love to hear from.
That was Monocle's Josh Fennett and Lexus Self in conversation with Carlotta Rebello. Now do tune in tomorrow at the same time as we'll reveal which city took the 3rd position in our ranking. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
With the Euros in full swing, all eyes are on football across the continent. It's been reported that the Dallas-based developer and investor Todd Interests is considering a bid for the historic Parisian team Red Star FC. Sean Todd, founder and chair of Todd Interests, spoke to Monocle's US editor Chris Lord. While Sean couldn't deny or confirm the bid, he had this to say about Red Star FC.
It's arguably the most remarkable club in all of Parisian football and in all of France with respect to its history. It has, we believe, the most solid fan base of any club in all of France. It has a fan base that cares. It has a fan base that has high expectations about football, not about pomp and circumstance, but about football. And they've been faithful fans. Over the last decade and 2 to 3 decades, this team has gone from League One to League Two to League Three, and they've just come off a fantastic season being brought up into League Two. There have been some struggles. There's been struggles with the stadium that's not been able to be occupied due to safety issues, a new stadium that has stalled construction, and then obviously a lot of questions around present ownership and what's happening. So I can't begin to empathize as a fan, but I know this has been a fan base that's always been a fan of the people, by the people, and for the people. And they deserve to have an ownership that respects the passion they have for the team and equally shares the passion for their team.
The club is currently owned by 777 Partners, an investment firm out of Miami, Florida. Now, they were not treated kindly by fans when they took over Red Star. You know, there were smoke bombs thrown from the stands. It generated a lot of anger from those fans. Now, I wonder if you think of yourself coming from the outside of France as an investor coming outside, how can that be managed differently by a different owner, if you like? How can you manage that relationship when a new owner takes over?
Well, Chris, I can't speak to others, but what I can speak to is my family and how we've tried to live life now in our 35th year of a family business. And our family business is comprised of several families that work with us, that we fellowship with and labor together each day. It's amazing what's happened in the world today. We're starving in almost every nation for real transparency, for authenticity. And I think that leads with being a good leader, is to get in the trenches side by side with people. You know, sports in general has become somewhat of a circus at the higher levels. So much money, all focused on sponsorships and profitability. And make no mistake, all of us need to be provided with our respective families. But this is a team that I think the expectation level is very high on making sure that these players are given the appropriate means to do the best they can do. And I think that's all the fans want. I think this is a fan base that's very comfortable saying, let me be me, let you be you, but don't you tell me how to be me. I think they have a very realistic worldview. In everything that we've done, in every business enterprise that we've been involved in, it's been about people. It's been about listening. It's been about building consensus. Now, there needs to be a leader, and there are those that are at risk and those that are not at risk, and I think people respect that.
Sean, look, you know, as you say, you're a family business. You've had very much great involvement in the city of Dallas and beyond, hospitality, real estate, urbanism as well, rethinking neighbourhoods that have been troubled. But, you know, for a lot of these fans, their club, their football club, is their family. It's something that means a lot to them. And I wonder if there is a great deal of disquiet on the terraces of football clubs all over Europe at the moment, frankly, about American investment coming into those clubs and how that might change the nature of the game. Do you empathise with those concerns? Do you understand where those fans are coming from, specifically about that American ownership coming into European football?
I greatly empathize, particularly with these large conglomerates and these large sovereign nations that have completely disregarded those that helped get the team where it is today, the fans. In and of the fans, these teams don't exist. The passion by these players that comes about from supportive fans. So yes, I greatly empathize, and particularly when there's expectations or statements that have been made that actions don't align with words.
That brings us, I think, nicely to the situation in St. Juan, in the stadium and around that club. Sean, I recognise you're at a position where you can't say too much about what's happening or what's about to happen. But if we talk about vision, what do you see down the track? Where could that neighbourhood, that area go if you had a hand in things?
The people of this neighborhood and beyond are remarkable. I'm from a small town in Ada, Oklahoma, a town of 12,000 people. And this area is changing somewhat. There's new restaurants. You're seeing vitality. And frankly, the greatest soccer players in the world all live within a several kilometer radius of State Bauer. I think having a solid academy and having fans that can actually see the young men from their community be a part of a team that can advance, and this not be about pomp and circumstance of a team, but be about the pure sport of football. You have a very solid mayor who understands St. Juan, and you're seeing more and more notoriety, particularly with the Olympics coming to Paris and the different physical things that are happening there. And I think the mayor has taken a moment to use this to talk about the people that he so serves and is accountable to. So I see an incredibly bright history for St. Juan in this whole area of Paris.
That was Sean Todd speaking with Monocle's Chris Lord. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now we're going to conclude today's episode with a look at fashion and retail. Dana Thomas, an expert in both those areas, joins us from Paris. Good morning to you, Dana.
Good morning.
Now, lots and lots going on there. Of course, Olympics, everybody's looking towards that. A fabulous show took over Paris this weekend. Tell us more.
Oh, what a scene it was. So in the heart of Paris, on the Place Vendôme, Vogue World descended. It was like this, spaceship that came down in the center of the city and dropped out a bunch of models and athletes dancing, and I don't know what was. It was a fashion extravaganza, and they shut down a large part of the city, and already the city's pretty shut down because they're building, of things all over town. The archery is going to be on the Invalides, and beach volley on the behind the Eiffel Tower, and a skate park on the Place la Concorde. So to shut down Place Vendôme too was like, okay, there's not much of a city left, but there were hundreds of models. And the best was when Gigi Hadid rode out dressed in Hermes on a horse trotting around, the column in cobblestones. It was just kind of crazy. Bad Bunny was rapping, and there was for 500 very select people who paid between 2,000 and 3,000 euros a person to attend this 1-hour fashion show. And it was quite a scene.
I understand it was celebrating 100 years of French fashion, and they used a different sport as a backdrop for each decade.
Well, that's what they say. Officially that's what it was. And they started with some pieces from Chanel that were, and some other old houses that were recreated. Lanvin, I think, was one from the 1920s, and they burned through a century worth of looks. And they had, what was very beautiful is they brought out the beautiful flowing chiffon gowns from the Battle of Versailles in 1973 in bright, cheerful colors of like royal blue and sunshine yellow and magenta. And that flowing around the column of the Place Vendôme was really spectacular. But, and then they had the athletes. I mean, they had dancers dressed as athletes. They had people with like tennis rackets busting, rapper moves. And they had, people dressed as fencers, like with their, doing sort of Madonna-esque dancing with sabers. And it was wow. It was a wow.
I'm just having a look at some pictures here. We've got Kendall Jenner, who closed the show, I think, in a nude corset dress.
Yeah, there was a lot of, it was, what it felt like, honestly. Yes, they showed us some history of French fashion, and they had Yves Saint Laurent in it, which one would hope since he was the king of French fashion for several decades. But ironically, Vogue had feuded with him and refused to run any of his clothes for as many decades. But there was lots of Saint Laurent on the runway. And I mean, it was very beautiful. The clothes were very beautiful, but it just felt like a gigantic commercial for Vogue and for the French fashion industry.
Let's have a quick look at Men's Fashion Week, because that's been Paris Fashion Week Men's, which has been going on.
Yes, well, it's been there've been a couple shows that took people's breath away. The main one, I mean, there was two. I went to one called Amiri, which is it's two Californians that really stirred up Paris menswear this week. Mike Amiri, who's from LA, has a beautiful menswear company he's only had for 10 years. And I met him his first year here. And it started out as sort of a rocker guy and rocker chick clothing company where he would like take T-shirts in the desert and shoot them with birdshot and put holes in them and destroy them and things. You know, like kind of experimental, but very rock and roll. Well, it's morphed into this hip hop brand that's just like uber bling and beautiful. So he had a show in the Jardin des Plantes where he was showing sort of mint colored sequin tuxedos and sort of retro 50s and 60s sweaters and blousons and jackets with like sparkly stars like you would see on Christmas wrapping paper from the 1960s. It was very cheerful and very chic and sexy. And then Rick Owens, who was also originally from LA and has been in Paris for about 20 years, maybe a bit more now. His show at the Palais de Tokyo was a spectacular homage to, I guess you would say, inclusivity, the world politics. He had, you know, he's a futurist, and he's seeing what we'll probably be wearing in 20 and 30 years. But he also was making it look very, you know, about the world today. And so there was like masses of people in capes and tunics, you know, an homage to what's going on in the Middle East, but in white, you know, this, you know, sort of peaceful white. And there was, I mean, it was spectacular. They were processions like a Hollywood costume drama mixed with a peace march. Do you see what I mean? It was extraordinary, and it nods to all different cultures of the world. While it was set to Beethoven's Seventh Symphony outside at the Palais de Tokyo, and it was real commentary on the world today and how we need to live together and embrace beauty together in order to live peacefully together.
And I see that Michael Sabatini, the editor-in-chief of Esquire, has said that there are a lot of just good, solid, wearable clothes, which is not something you often hear in that context.
Absolutely. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, I love that little half cape, and I would totally wear that in the springtime with a dress or a suit. And it was for men, it was for women, it was, you know, it was gender neutral. He had models from every single shape, size, and, you know, skin color. He had you know, somebody called it the United Nations of Rick Owens. It was really that, and much of it in white, which was, you know, very purity and honesty and modern, contemporary, now.
Absolutely. And also, of course, the colour of peace.
In the colour of peace, exactly.
Dana Thomas in Paris, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And that's all for today's programme. Many thanks to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Chris Chomak and Monica Lillis, and our studio managers, Christy O'Grady and Flynn Simons, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be back with the briefing live at midday in London. One of the things we'll be looking at is Ukraine's accession bid. That is due to start talks about that along with Moldova. That's happening in Belgium tomorrow, the 25th. So we'll be discussing that along with many other stories on the briefing. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.